Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, your guide to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we planned down to the very last detail how we're going to communicate all those concepts, tools and techniques to you that you need to know for the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner, and yes, in this lesson we discuss the first step of effective project communications, and that is of course communications planning. In the process of plan communications, we determine the information and communication needs of the project stakeholders. We discuss basic communication channels, models, and methods. A well-planned communication strategy greatly increases the odds of your project's success. So we are going to be discussing the characteristics of the plan communication management process. We review the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques of the process as you have seen it done many times before, focusing on why we use them, why are they appropriate here in this process. We delve into the various communication models and methods and wrap up the lesson with a summary of what we have learned. Since the plan communications management process covers a lot of ground, it will be presented in two parts. And if you've seen some of our two-parters, you probably already know what the two parts contain. Yes, in this part right now here, part one, we'll look at an overview of the process followed by the inputs that are needed. And then in part two, we'll discuss the tools, the techniques, the outputs of the process, followed by a brief review of the entire lesson, including a few questions to test you. Communications management requires a lot of activities to be successfully implemented, from planning all the way to the ultimate disposition of assets, or as the PMBOK guide puts it, project communications management includes the processes that are required to ensure timely and appropriate planning, collecting, creation, distribution, storage, retrieval, management, control, monitoring, and yes, the ultimate disposition of project information. And when it comes to the processes that the PMBOK guide gives us to do all of this, it pretty much follows the plan, do, check, act cycle, which means we start out with planning. The plan communications management process is the process of developing an appropriate approach and plan for project communications based on stakeholders' information, needs, and requirements and available organizational assets. Once we know how we're going to communicate, well, we're going to communicate in manage communications. That is the process of creating, collecting, distributing, storing, retrieving, and the ultimate disposition of project information in accordance with the plan that we developed in the first process there. So we have the plan, we have the do here, and now we're going to move over to the check and the act in the process of control communications. That's the process of monitoring and controlling communications throughout the entire project lifecycle to ensure that the information needs of the project stakeholders are met. So first we plan our communications, then we do our communications, and then we make sure that the communications are actually meeting the needs, or rather still meeting the needs, because they do change over the life of our project. So 3 processes in this knowledge area, and they nicely fall into the 3 large process groups. The small ones of obviously being initiation and closing at the beginning and at the end of our project. So we have the plan communications management process, which is the focus of this lesson, obviously in planning, and then manage communications is in execution, and control communications is in monitoring and controlling. The main concept of this process is that plan communications is about developing a communications plan or approach that is tailored to the information and communication needs of the project stakeholders. And in order to accomplish this, we must first determine what those needs are. For instance, what type of information does each stakeholder need to allow them to contribute to the project? How often is this communication expected or required? Will it be daily, weekly, monthly, or at particular milestones? In what form or through what method will the information be communicated? Is a face-to-face meeting appropriate? A phone call, an email, or will a simple status report in writing be enough? And finally, who should send or distribute the communication? Who is the originator of those communication messages? Should it always be the project manager, or would another member of the project team be more appropriate? The answer to all of these questions will be influenced by a variety of factors, such as the type of information to be communicated and the role and responsibility of the person receiving the information, to name just a couple. Successful communication comes first from a good plan. How to best develop this plan is what we will be discussing throughout this lesson. Communications is a key success factor on most projects. That is why on most projects, communications planning is performed early and often during the development of the project management plan. That is why we say that the plan communications management process occurs early, allowing the proper resources, time and budget to be allocated for the required activities. So what makes communication effective? Well, of course, it's all about providing information. Here are some characteristics of effective communication. So it's important, first of all, that your information is provided in the right format, the format that your recipient wants or is expecting. The information also has to be communicated at the right time, and it's, of course, very important to deliver it to the correct and proper audience. No need to deliver the wrong information to the wrong people. And of course, once it reaches your audience, it has to have the right impact at their end as well. And finally, effective communication means providing only the information that is really necessary. Otherwise, you'll have information overload or overflow at the receiving end, and that will definitely not have the right impact. All of these characteristics should be taken into account when planning your communications on your project. Like many planning processes in project management, planning your communications is a continuous process that evolves over time. As mentioned in the PMBOK guide, the plan communications process is not simply an activity that you do once. The plan should be reviewed at regular intervals throughout the project lifecycle. And why isn't it simply a static and one-time event? Well, one reason to add information could be the addition of additional stakeholders. It's likely that they have preferences and specific communications needs that you have to fulfill. How about a stakeholder or project team member whose role or responsibility changes? This could be due to any number of factors like prioritization to a higher profile project or activity. You may want to decrease the frequency or the detail of communication for that particular person. Conversely, someone on the project may get promoted and have far greater responsibility and influence. Best to check if their needs have changed as a result of that promotion. And there is the fact that most, if not all, projects are dynamic. Things change. A change in scope, whether an increase or decrease, may require some change in your communications. The take-home message here is, like many processes and documents, communication planning should be done actively and adapt to the ever-changing project conditions and stakeholder needs. While all projects share a need to communicate information throughout the project team and to stakeholders, the needs, the methods, and the distribution of this information will vary with the project. And some key questions that you need to consider when planning communications are: who needs what information, and who is even authorized to access this information and distribute the information? Where should the information be stored, and how should it be retrieved at the receiving end? Is your company, are the stakeholders in different time zones? Is the company or project one that requires the information to be in more than one language? And are there cross-cultural considerations to be taken into account? And here we not just mean language, we also mean the style of the language and the communication used, formal versus informal information, and some cultures and some people preferring personal one-on-one communication over simply receiving a mass email. So how do we derive the right approach and document the best communications management plan? Well, we use the inputs, tools, techniques, and the outputs of the plan communications management process. This figure here, as you know, shows each of the ITTOs of the process, and we will, yes, review them in detail and emphasize those that are likely to receive greater focus on the exam. As always, it's important to understand the reasons or answer the question of why the process uses a particular input or tool and technique, as well as the significance of the outputs. If you understand the why of each of these ITTOs, if you understand the concepts of each of these ITTOs, you will understand what we do in plan communications management. The four inputs of plan communications management are the project management plan, the stakeholder register, the enterprise environmental factors, and the organizational process assets. And as there are so few of them that normally the enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets on this slide, we have to abbreviate it with EEF and OPA, but they're so few we can actually write their names out properly this time. So let's take a look at one at a time at these four inputs. The first input being the project management plan. We need this here in this process because it provides us with information about how the project will be executed. The methods or approaches used to monitor the project progress are defined in the plan. It also contains specifics about how the project will be controlled. And of course, at the very end, it will tell us what is required to close our project. A detailed understanding of each of these details that we have defined in the project management plan will enable us to perform proper communications planning at each stage throughout our project. We learned in this lesson's main concept that developing a communications management plan is about determining and documenting an approach that is tailored to the information and communication needs of whom? Our project stakeholders. And much of this may already be documented in the stakeholder register. So it provides us important information about these needs, such as identification information like the stakeholder name, their position within the organization. It provides us assessment information like their communication requirements or preferences, their expectations with regards to project communications, and it gives us some kind of stakeholder classification like, are they a supporter, are they neutral to our project, are they a resistor, or are they perhaps even a champion for our project. This information is vital input if project communications with the stakeholders is to be effective and efficient. The enterprise environmental factors will have a significant impact on how communications are planned. How you communicate is influenced by many EEFs. Generally speaking, they fall into two groups. The internal factors. These are, of course, most often defined by the company itself. Here we're talking about preferences, policies, or procedures. For example, whether you send your status report via email or you simply have to post it to your company's intranet and then people have to go and grab it from there. We also have the external environmental factors, and these are typically defined by the general environment in which your company is doing business. For example, communication expectations, such as quarterly reports or regular press releases that are typical of your business environment. You have to take all of these factors into consideration when planning your communications approach. Some very common environmental factors that will influence how you plan communications are the corporate culture and your company's organizational structure. You will, for example, communicate differently in an open matrix organization than you will in a functional organization. There may be certain standards in your industry regarding communications that require you to keep specific external stakeholders informed. The risk tolerances of your stakeholders, they will determine what information is needed and how and when it should be communicated. Or you may have certain technologies like blogs, emails, intranet, extranet, press releases, and so on at your disposal that will facilitate communications. And in regards to the organizational process assets that will contribute towards your communications planning, we have three very common examples for you here. First of all, we have templates. Yes, there may be templates that you need to use for communications, like status report templates or press release templates. Then there might be policies, procedures that discuss record retention and tell us that we must keep all formal project communications for 10 years, or that all external communication must be managed by our marketing department and not by our internal project staff. And then there may also be lessons learned files or other historical information from previous projects that you can now use to better plan communications on your new project. And with that, we have come to the end of part 1 of Plan Communications. That means that it's now time for Justine and me to go take a break and have a cup of tea. So what do we say, Justine?
See you on the other side.
Until next time.